Okay.
Dipping your face into a fragrant bouquet. Taking a nice, long, hard look at a great set of legs. Getting a bite of that buttery flavor that you've been waiting for. Hearing these terms might paint a variety of pictures in your mind. However, they're all related when it comes to one thing: wine. Winemaking is a complex art form that involves a great deal of attention, skill, and understanding. The same can be said for wine tasting. Some of us will never really be able to appreciate the subtle nuances in a good glass of wine. Thankfully, there are people who dedicate their lives to studying, understanding, and of course tasting wine that are willing to help us out. These people are known as sommeliers. You might think that a sommelier is someone who gets to sit around and drink for a living, but as I've learned, there's a great deal more to it than that. Having worked in the restaurant industry for a number of years, I've worked side by side with sommeliers and have been curious about the position. In order to get a full appreciation of what a sommelier does, we're going to take a brief look at the winemaking process, then go through some of the distinct characteristics that a sommelier looks for when determining the quality of wine. And finally, we'll answer the question, how do I get that job? Believe it or not, it's not as easy as you might think. It all starts with the grape. There are many varieties of wine, but most major wine grapes come from the species Vitis vinifera. Vitis is Latin for vine, but also the source of vita, life itself. We all know how difficult balancing life can be, and balancing all the factors that affect the outcome of a good bottle of wine is just as challenging. Many things like soil quality, temperature, and weather conditions can affect how a wine will change before it reaches the bottle. That's why wines are primarily grown in specific parts of the world, like Spain, France, Italy, or the United States. Karen McNeil, author of the Wine Bible, breaks the average grape down into weight: 75% pulp, 20% skin, and 5% seeds. Now the pulp is primarily what becomes the wine, and mainly consists of just water and sugar. The skin, however, is responsible for the aroma, flavor, color, and tannin. Tannin being primarily responsible for what helps wine improve with age. Some wines are then aged in oak barrels, others are infused with different flavors and essences, and some are just corked up and sent to the stores. But a good sommelier doesn't participate in the growing process, but understands it well enough to dip his or her nose into a wine, take a sip into their mouths, and determine the history that reveals a great journey from the vine to the glass. So how does someone judge wine like a pro? What makes a sommelier better at tasting wine than you or I? There are two common misconceptions about sommeliers. One, that they have more heightened senses than a normal human being. Or two, that a sommelier's level of consumption make them more seasoned than most people. Granted, a sommelier does certainly drink a larger variety of wines in a higher quantity than most, but that would also mean that an older drinker would naturally have a better palate than someone just turning drinking age, and that's been determined to be untrue. Tasting wine is simply about paying attention to all of your senses. Sommeliers are able to wash away all the distractions and focus on the story that the wine is telling them. The three senses, sight, taste, and smell, play a key role in properly tasting wine. Kevin Zraley, author of Windows on the World, the Complete Wine Course, breaks wine tasting down even further into 5 simple steps: color, swirl, smell, taste, and savor. Color of wine doesn't necessarily mean that wine is good or bad. A red wine, for instance, may have a darker color because it's older, or because it's been aged in oak for quite some time. Also, different grape varieties yield different colors. Tasting is an important step, but each person's interpretation of taste is different. Mark Twain once wrote, "Each man's taste is the standard." And believe it or not, some chemists suggest that wine is virtually tasteless, but happens to be deeply fragrant, which affects how the brain registers flavor in the first place. Which leads us to the most important part of wine tasting, which is smell. According to Kevin Zraley, you can perceive just 4 tastes: sweet, sour, bitter, and salty. But the average person can identify more than 2,000 scents, and wine has more than 200 of its own. Bouquet is a term used to describe a total smell of wine after the alcohol content has mixed with oxygen and creates an overall fragrance. This is where the ability of a sommelier is most impressive. Through familiarity and the understanding of the intricacies of wine, a sommelier can pick up on some of the grapes' more subtle flavors. Believe it or not, most skilled sommeliers will tell you that you can continue smelling wine even after you've taken a sip from your glass. Actually, they recommend it. As the wine is mixed with your saliva and warmed, compounds are released that waft into the back of your mouth and behind the bridge of your nose. This releases signals to nerve cells, sending information to your brain that can better interpret the scent. Smell is the most important step in wine tasting process, and most people simply don't spend enough time on it. But a skilled sommelier takes the time to dig deep and find what might be hidden to a more uneducated palate. Finally, after sipping into a wine, a sommelier will take a moment to savor the experience. Some master sommeliers have compared drinking wine to browsing in an art gallery. Once you've found a painting you like, you take the time to appreciate it and learn all you can about the artist, the conception, and the process, and the same goes for wine. So, how does one become a sommelier? If you've ever been in a restaurant that employs a sommelier, you might be confused by his or her presence. Is that a waiter? Perhaps a manager? What's somebody who's working in the kitchen doing in a suit? These are all valid questions, and a sommelier can sometimes wear many hats. An interview for an article entitled A Career as a Sommelier, Tommy Lamb, president of the Singapore Wine Academy, who holds an MBA in wine, states that knowledge of wine does not alone make a sommelier. Lamb believes that a sommelier should be an entertainer by nature, but also oversee the waitstaff as a manager, and have as much knowledge of the kitchen as an executive chef. Because a sommelier must also be able to properly apply the knowledge of wine to the pairing of food, most of the menu must start out in various culinary schools. Only by understanding what goes into making a meal can somebody truly hope to pair wine with different tastes. After the education of food has been achieved, a sommelier will move on to more specific training. The two most prestigious schools of study are the Institute of the Masters of Wine and the Court of Master Sommeliers. Both have originated in Great Britain. Both schools take a great deal of time and study in order to achieve, and believe it or not, only an average of 1 in 4 who apply will actually pass the course. However, you don't have to go to the Harvard of wine schools to get a job as a sommelier. Most community colleges and universities in Australia, Europe, and America offer various levels of education. Currently, there are 96 master sommeliers in North America alone, 167 certified professionals worldwide. However, the numbers and resources are growing. A sommelier's salary ranges anywhere from $24,000 to $75,000 depending on the training and skill level, and also the level of the restaurant in which they might be employed, only because most sommeliers are also responsible for culminating a wine list, and so there, of course, the higher prestige the restaurant, the higher paid the sommelier. The hours are demanding and similar to that of a manager or a waiter, including nights, weekends, and sometimes holidays. After several years in the trenches, a sommelier can establish him or herself as a wine expert and move on to publishing articles, hosting workshops, or training other sommeliers to share in their knowledge. As you can see, the job of a sommelier is much more extensive than just drinking wine for a living. It requires travel, education in the creation of wine, the ability to focus the senses, and a knowledge of the culinary arts. In some ways, a sommelier plays the role of a teacher in a world of students studying the 8,000-year-old practice of winemaking. It may not pay the most money, and may have demanding hours, but if you're passionate about wine, there is no greater achievement. I hope now, if you're at a nice dinner, mulling over the wine list, you'll take a moment to consult the sommelier, because they're a wealth of knowledge, and they're ready and willing to share it with you. Thank you.